afternoon, everyone. I'm Deanie.
And I'm Sarah.
And you're watching the Property Marketing Lounge. If you're listening live or you're catching up on YouTube or on our podcast, I hope you enjoy the session today. It's a very important and interesting session all about affordability. So I know we're going to get into the detail and have lots of interesting things to discuss. This webinar series is based around our research piece in partnership with our brilliant partners UPP, and it's all about the future of home according to Gen Z. We've surveyed 2,500 young people across students, graduates and 16 to 18-year-olds to ask them what they want from a home. So we've got lots of really great data. On affordability, we've asked really what young people value and what they're willing to pay for. So we'll be delving into a lot more around that topic today to really understand what students want, and we hope will help the sector build the right things of what people value and are willing to pay for around that affordability piece. The research we've split into a number of different topics. Obviously, we're doing affordability today, but we also have sustainability, wellbeing, community, and technology. Those that are live are available to download on our website now, and you'll find webinar series for those topics as well and a mini report. So please do go and check those out because there's lots of great information available to everyone for free from our website. And once again, a big thank you to UPP for partnering on this research with us, because it's really valuable to sector, and also to Dataloft, who's been analysing it independently for us. So really, let's get on to the subject. It's an important subject of the now and of the time. I will let our guests go around our virtual sofa and introduce themselves and who they are in a minute. To our viewers, please do feel free to put any questions you want to ask the panel in the Q&A, because we will monitor that more than the chat function, but we will try and answer those to the panel as we go along. So I will hand over to Rommel first. Would you like to introduce yourself? Sorry.
To check I'm off mute, I am. So I'm Rommel Faytaren, the Director of Commercial Services for Optival. So Optival is a housing association with 45,000 homes operating in the south of England. We have a small portfolio of student accommodation and key work accommodation, as well as retail and offices. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Rommel. Amit?
Hi guys, I'm Amit. I'm the founder of UniAcco, which is a 3-year-old marketplace. It's a global student accommodation marketplace with more than 600,000 beds listed on our platform across UK. Thank you.
Thanks. Victoria?
Hi, I'm Victoria Tolmie-Loverseed. I am an Assistant Chief Executive for Standards at the National Student Housing Charity, Unipol Student Homes. I am very involved in a big piece of research we do every 3 years with the NUS, which is the Accommodation Cost Survey, which I guess that some of you will be familiar with, and I'm really pleased to be here today. So thank you.
Great. And Matthew?
I'm Matthew Morgan. I'm the Director of the Quality of Life Foundation, a charity whose aim is to make health and wellbeing central to the way we create and care for our homes and communities.
Great, thank you. And Jon?
Hi, I'm Jon Wakeford. I'm Director of Engagement at UPP. I'm also the Chair of the UPP Foundation, which is our charitable company. I'm also a member of the Cross-Party Higher Education Commission.
Great, thank you, and welcome everyone. And I'll pass over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to kick off. Let's not beat around the bush. This is a tricky conversation to have in relation to customers' needs, the impact on their lives, and also versus the commercial needs of many businesses. But let's just sort of set the playing field straight, really. What does affordability in relation to homes mean to you? There's obviously affordability with a capital A and affordability with a small a, but let's just delve into what it all means to kind of from us, from our, I guess, our professional standpoints. Rommel, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. So affordability is something that's actually quite central to our business. So social housing provider, Our role is to provide accommodation to people whose needs are not met by the market. So often we charge up to 80% market rent, and certainly a key work accommodation, which we operate in partnership with the NHS, we do the same thing. But just kind of broadly speaking about affordability, I think outside of where they are subsidised, I think it's a question of really the income to their rent ratio and what that actually means for them, the renter. So in this respect, I think one of the challenges will be, can they afford it? And then the limitations in terms of then the options, the locality, and all those other kind of factors that I think make it quite difficult when the market rent does not necessarily meet perhaps then the needs of the majority of people. And I've seen some statistics from the Office National Statistics around affordability levels, and in London in particular, we've got a great challenge. That's
Jon.
Yeah, I guess for us, so our model is an on-campus model, long-term partnerships. Occupancy is the key discipline, so we're operating at between 99 and 100% occupancy, and therefore a 50-year partnership. So clearly affordability is key. I think for us, in terms of affordability, most of our sort of rental increases are actually capped within our contracts at a certain level. So we have a cap and collar. So, for example, a lot of our contracts you can't go above 6%. And so I guess with increasing utilities, our view is that we're in a long-term partnership. There may be years where we don't achieve what we want to achieve, but ultimately occupancy is the key driver. So we have to keep rents reasonable. The other thing is, because we effectively do large-scale estate transfers, we also have a reasonable amount of cheaper, older accommodation. So it's about having a spread, a sales mix, and ensuring that there's an offer there that represents value for money for any budget, really.
Thank you. Victoria, you've been living and breathing this topic, I guess, long before cost of living crisis. So what does it mean in relation to your role?
I was just nodding my head vigorously at what Jon was saying at the end there, really, which is that it's about having a level of choice and diversity of prices within the portfolio that you have, or within the city or within the university. So that's been one of the big findings from the accommodation cost survey over the last few years, is that, I think value for money for students and what they're able to afford is very variable, and that as long as there is something, there is availability kind of for students with more constrained incomes, that's really kind of what we need, is just a bit of choice at different points within the market. At the moment there is a lot of focus in development on kind of high spec products, and that's fine if people can afford them, and that's what the market wants to build. But as long as we maintain to have a little some choice and availability at the middle and the lower end of the range, I think that's really what we think is important, just having that choice and availability.
Thank you. And Matthew, I guess the clue is in your organisation's name, the quality of life. Is that kind of how you quantify affordability, is in relation to quality of life?
Yeah, affordability is one of the kind of sub things that we look at in terms of contributing to people's quality of life, and they can include people's sense of influence or control, their health, the access to nature, the way they get around, the movement, sense of wonder or kind of art and culture or play, and also a sense of belonging or community. But affordability very much comes into that kind of sense of if you've got control over your finances, then you're going to have a more secure and happier time in your student life. So it's a really important component, and something that I think is more and more difficult in the cost of living crisis. So every sympathy with those students who are going through it at the moment.
Thank you. And Amit, you've got sort of unique exposure to the international student market. So is your view on affordability any different to what we've already talked about?
I think it's pretty much on the same lines, but yes, the moment you add international students, the definition, so to say, of affordability changes because again, people come with very diverse backgrounds. But I think this year with the inflation related challenges, I think for everybody, affordability has been a concern. I'm talking about the data set of about 200 plus students, 200,000 plus students who came on our website. We actually could not provide accommodation to people or meet the expectations of more than 50% of them because of the price and the affordability. So there's clearly a aspect of costing and of the pricing of these student accommodation or PBSA accommodation, which has to kind of figure out a way to solve this because too many students are not able to find the right accommodation for the price point they expect it to come their way. And I think affordability is kind of becoming challenging day by day, and even for the international students, I would say.
I mean, what are particularly the Indian students that you're speaking to, what's their perception of what's happening here in the UK at the moment with regard to the cost of living? Is it going to sort of challenge their ambitions?
So good thing is, Sarah, that most of the established operators this year, they have decided not to increase the price or load that or pass on that price increased, be it energy or other aspects to the students. And that is a good thing. I think it's a long-term view, as John was also saying, it's more of a long-term view and in benefit of the student. But I think everybody today is concerned, and I have been covering a different aspect of it, wherein in general, the cost of higher education for all these Indian students have gone up by 20 to 30%, right? Because the currency has depreciated. Then you also have the inflation in the local jurisdiction. So all this put together, the cost of education per se has gone up 20, 30%. Another aspect of this for international student is the enough of education has not happened. So today, the perception wise, they still feel and think that the private accommodation actually is coming cheaper their way. And we all agree to that there are challenges relating to private accommodation, which these students face when they land up in the destination country, be it UK. And they realize that, okay, energy bill is not included in this and that cost is not included and all of that, right? So I think a lot of our time this year has gone into explaining to them the product and the suitability and defining the affordability. In terms of their perception, the affordability is going for cheaper private accommodation, wherein actually the all-encompassing, all fee included PBSA accommodation, which is priced at a right price point, is actually coming across as a better value proposition for them. So a lot of effort has gone in from the team this year to explain this. Having said that, there were a lot of students we lost because of the perception that PBSA is not very affordable for them. So yeah, that's been the trend.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
In our research, and we asked future students, current students, and graduates if they thought £165 average a week outside of London and £259 a week inside of London was a fair price to pay for student accommodation, including bills. Unsurprisingly, most said no. But what we were quite surprised about is that the future students were far more likely to say yes. Why do you think that is? Are they just more realistic? Who wants to take that one?
Perhaps unrealistic. Just not knowing really about the real cost of living, perhaps slightly shielded by living at home with parents. So I think it's very difficult to know about what the real costs are when you don't have to pay them yourselves. But I think your question, the rent level that you've picked is about the average at the moment. It was quite close to the average in the accommodation cost survey. And I think, when current students were saying it's unfair, I think you just have to pull that back to what their student finance amount is. When we looked at this in the accommodation cost survey, I think the average student loan was 6,900 a year. And the average rent was 6,700. So students are just doing the sums, aren't they, and saying, how can this be right? It doesn't feel fair. So it is difficult for students, and I think they do feel that the system is slightly unfair and weighted against them, which is sad, but and I think as well that it's compounded slightly by the fact that student finance is not going up as much as inflation. So I think for students this year it's a really difficult situation for a lot of them.
I guess if you looked at those results, you know, future students, as Vicky has attested to, you know, it's quite a hypothetical amount. You know, you don't really know what it means until you're in it. And then when you're a current student and you're actually having to take extra jobs to pay the rent, then it looks very different. And as a graduate, I guess you've been through it and you're sort of you know, a bit wiser and a little bit more hardened. So I guess that could explain what that data looks like.
Does anyone else have a view on why future students are, as Jon said, less hardened to the prices?
I think what Victoria and Jon has said is absolutely right. You know, it's fine looking at a figure in your head, but until you actually live through it, having been quite protected of exposure in terms of, you know, financially operating in the real world, it's okay to make an assumption that things will be okay based on, you know, what you can see in front of you. So yeah, I think that's probably why. And
I think there's probably I think there is probably a lack of understanding, even from parents, really, about the real cost of going to university. I think there's an assumption that maintenance loans will cover more than they do. And it's only really when you get to August or September and you're starting to kind of figure it all out, where a lot of people realise, wait a minute, there's a gap here, £400 or £500 a month or something. But it's not always obvious to people up front in advance that there is that gap, that parents or part-time work are going to have to fund those extra costs. So yeah, it's often a hard lesson, I think, when people are arriving at university.
I think that's a really good point, Victoria, and I don't know that, you know, that's not really been sort of covered in the press, is that the cost of living crisis and supporting children through university was going to have an impact on, you know, the next generations up, quality of life and challenges with affordability as well. It's, you know, coming from all directions. Amit, what kind of involvement, you know, are you seeing from parents from international students? Our research showed that obviously a lot of them are actually, you know, they're self-funded by their families, you know, as opposed to here. So that must be, you know, that must be coming up in conversation.
So funnily, Sarah, actually, for the international student today, more than affordability, actually availability is a bigger challenge. And that's what they're going through. There are cities in UK which got sold in April, May, which is the time by most of the international don't even receive their CAS letters or confirmations, right? There's no way they can book, even though operators talk about no visa, no pay kind of policy. The visa success rate is 98% for Indian students going abroad or UK. All these factors, but still there is an inhibition to book the accommodation that early. And we have this year seen most of the cities, large cities, actually getting sold off much before the international demand comes your way. So this year, if you ask me frankly, more than affordability, actually availability was a bigger concern. Even today, I get kind of frantic calls of parents, because again, these international students are not used to booking that early. And I get frantic calls of students or parents saying, okay, I have landed in UK or London and I have no place to go, right? So, and it never used to be the case, right? There were markets, and these large markets typically used to stay or remain available till fag end of the season, right? So today it's actually availability more than affordability, which is a crisis if you ask. And nobody is actually bothered about the price. As far as international students go, I'm very specific on that. Pricing is not a concern as far as they get to live where they want to live.
And Matthew, I guess, you know, kind of thinking about quality of life of all generations, you expecting this to be a trend, that kind of pinch point kind of shifting and, you know, impacting all generations?
It does, and I applaud their optimism as they go into university, and perhaps it's the last opportunity they'll have to maintain that optimism before the reality of student life, and then when they're a young professional, which is just as difficult, if not more so, and then obviously moving through the life cycle of housing and private renting, and on they go. So yeah, enjoy that sense of thinking you'll be able to afford it while you can. I think we've got a really deep seated and very difficult to mend housing problem, and it obviously extends to all sectors, and I don't think that the student housing is any different. That Amit, you're right, there isn't enough of it, and it is too expensive, so that's something that's common to all sectors of the market, and I think it's not solving itself anytime soon. So I think this is just something that one has to work with, and maybe there's a certain amount of setting people's expectations, or communicating with people about what to expect, or how to manage. I saw in your report that there were 48% of the students who were taking part-time jobs, which is, I don't know if they'd imagine that they'd do that before, or if that was something that they found that they had to. But I think there's obviously a gap between what the maintenance grants and the reality of living are, and so it might be good to kind of try to communicate those challenges before they get there, just to prepare them.
I mean, the other side of, I guess, the actual rent is the bills and the energy costs debate. Most of PBSA and university accommodation will include bills, which obviously helps students to budget. But can you see a time when metering might be introduced in co-living environments? The students going to be demanding, I guess, their accountability on bills. I'm going to direct this to you, Rommel, initially, because obviously you're involved in different parts of the sector, not just PBSA. What's your kind of stance on bills included versus metering?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, we're aware that there's a rising cost of living, in particular the cost of energy, and we're not intending to change our approach in terms of the way we set our rent. So our rents, we've got the rent component, but inclusive of any energy costs. And the reason for that is we want to control and be quite fixed, because one of the, I suppose, our sale to students is that we are an affordable accommodation provider. In London, our rents are averaging around £200 a week, which is reasonably good in comparison, according to research that you've done. So it's within perhaps the tolerance of people who want to pay the kind of low to medium rents. And one way of being able to support students, given a social housing provider, is, and part of, I suppose, our mission is to help people who need to be helped, is to offer an alternative in the market that remains affordable. And one way of doing that is not changing tactic, where we're passing on costs that are beyond, I suppose, the students and our control.
Jon, what are you seeing from universities regarding their bills?
I think some of us have been around in the sector for quite a long time. There was a period where some of the providers, I think one city was Birmingham, they tried to sort of break out the utilities costs, and it was an absolute debacle. There was student uprising and protests and rent strikes and bits and bobs, and you can see why. I think we're slightly different being on campus. So sometimes, we're buying the energy, sometimes our university partners are buying the energy. But what we try to do is we try to sort of control that at the point of use. So for example, 2000 and, can't remember now, 8 probably, when we did our first eco residence at Lancaster, when we were redeveloping the estate at Lancaster, we had live metering there, and the students were, it was a bit of sort of like nudge economics. We got students into competition. Who could use the least, and as rent rent rebate for the winning townhouse. So those types of behaviours, I mean, we've been using those for quite some time, actually.
Victoria, how did this sort of feature in your research?
We did not talk about, I mean, we ask if utilities are included, but we don't really dive into any more detail on that. And obviously throughout the sector, the vast majority of people do include utilities on an unlimited basis. I mean, it's interesting. If the Unipol is itself a landlord, we've got about 3,000 tenants in Leeds, Bradford and Nottingham. And in all of our buildings, we have meters in the flats. If you went back 5 years ago, we used to charge an energy supplement. So it wasn't inclusive. Our tenants would pay an extra £6 or £7 a week on top of the rent. And if they use more energy than that, we would bill them for it at the end. If they use less, we would refund them the money. So good energy use was incentivized. We stopped doing that a few years ago because it wasn't particularly popular with students, and they didn't like the uncertainty of it. Basically, they were worried that they were going to get a big bill at the end of the year. Nobody ever did, but it was very hard to explain it to people and for them to feel a level of comfort at their exposure to increased costs. But we still have those meters, and we still give performance and usage information to our students, similar to what Jon was saying, just to try and incentivize good behaviour. And we're doing more and more of that this year. We've just employed a member of staff specifically to deal with encouraging fair usage of energy. So it's I think you do need to have meters in your developments, and I'm surprised that people don't build them in place.
No, so to add to Victoria's point, Sarah, I see this clearly coming in a trend. There are few operators who already have this meter system. What they do is there is a basic level of energy or Wi-Fi which is available to every student and which is included. But if the consumption is beyond that, they start charging them and they tell the student about it. It's a very transparent process. And I think there's also a perception that at a student life, you tend to waste resources. Till it was under control in terms of pricing, maybe people were not bothered that much. But I think considering the inflation which has set in and the prices, the way it has gone up, I see this practice coming more in kind of use. So yeah, I concur with Victoria on this.
And Matthew, I think Victoria just sort of touched on it, is control. Is people feeling out of control maybe of their bills or of their usage and of their rent and increases? What impact does that have in kind of when you're researching sort of quality of life in relation to money?
It's really key that people have that sense of influence and know that they can maintain control of their finances. The thing that slightly struck me was in shared accommodation, how are you going to manage your roommates' energy consumption if that's going to impact on you, and is that done by room to room, or I wasn't quite sure how that would work, because obviously you're a student, you're out of home for the first time, you're trying to manage your own habits and finances, and then the thought of trying to manage your flatmates as well would probably send me over the edge. So I guess that's something that you've had to take into account, and that they have to look at collectively and work out an answer to. But I know that there are many different variations in what people find comfortable. And so one person's comfort might be 18 degrees and others might be 24. And there's obviously a big price in difference in utilities, particularly these days. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you manage that.
Yeah, it's I think that's you've hit the nail on the head, really. I think the reason why people have steered clear, and in most cases, of metering in big sort of shared living environments is the fair usage and the potential friction and tension that may cause, not to mention the administration and billing side of things too. So it's definitely one to watch. And if you're interested in the topic, we did talk in more detail about it from a sustainability perspective in one of our other webinars. It was very clear from our survey that young people want good quality accommodation without fancy facilities and would opt to pay less for less. However, this is not what we're generally seeing the industry building. You know, we're kind of interested in where this sort of race to the top came from, and you know, is there any way to reverse it? You know, we've got this high level of stock with, you know, amazing roof terraces and roof bars and gyms and cinemas and bowling alleys, but you know, is that really what students want, and how can we backtrack from that to make more affordable accommodation? Anyone?
I think it's laudable the ambitions that student housing providers have to create that sense of community and that sense of belonging that you might feel through having extra facilities and places where people can congregate or get to know their neighbours, which are all really good. But I can see how affordability can, you know, if there is a supplement, and if you can see it starkly that this is how much that costs, then it could be something you'd balance. The thing that I would say is what's the area like? What you know, where is the student accommodation built? Is it somewhere that has existing services? Is it somewhere that has shops? Is it somewhere that has places to meet? Is it somewhere that has a leisure centre or some kind of gym? If we can build in places that already have that kind of mixed use neighbourhood, then you're going to be halfway there to providing the facilities that students will want and will feel as though they're kind of getting the full package that will hopefully help them through.
So Sarah, if I may add, I think bringing rationality to this whole concept of building community and the things you do and sometimes you overdo to build a community and try to comfort the student, I think that there is a call to bring rationality to it. It is a very important aspect as far as PBSA living goes. I think for international students specifically, and when we talk about going into PBSA or going for a little higher end than the average for the city and staying in a community, there is a significant value around it, and that and more than community, actually what our research internally shows is primary reason for that is security. So if you ask me, security, laundry or Wi-Fi, now these are very essential services which are very common, and if you provide, which is included in your bills, I think that's a fantastic way of doing it. But yes, rooftop bars and some of these party places you build or some of the excesses you build, I don't know. I think people need to now rationalize the product more towards the suitability and affordability than going towards the excesses. I think that's where the supply side of market will move.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'll dive in. I think we've yeah, we agree with most of that really. I think and the research showed that students didn't really want to pay for these extra facilities. I think that having a bit of space for study, shared study, small shared gatherings where people can get together and do their own things, I don't think they particularly need lots of facilities to enable that, just a bit of space and some sofas. And that's actually really valuable in allowing people to connect and build communities and get to know one another. But other than that, you know, Unipol is building at the moment, and most of our new developments, really, we just have a bit of common area and some welcome events at the beginning of the year. And after that, we try and leave students to themselves. And stripping things back to the essentials, but leaving a bit of space for people to get to know one another, I think is probably a really good point of direction for the future for where PBSA should go.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, because actually what we're dealing with here is actually about belonging, and, you know, how you establish that sense that a student belongs and feels at home. And we have plenty of places where we've built sort of, cinema rooms and X, Y, and Z, and they don't really get used for what they're built for, but they don't get used that often either. So I think Vicky's bang on. Of course, we've got some shared peer learning space, and actually it gets used like a sort of an overspill of the library, and actually it's it's very well used, that stuff. So I don't think it's overcomplicated. I think the other thing is to integrate, particularly with our model, is to integrate the university with our accommodation. So in some of the sort of, we try and give free accommodation, or at least subsidise accommodation, to members of wardens' teams, things like that. So you've got that link to the student experience from the university's perspective, and I think that works really, really well actually, and makes everybody feel like they're part of the same accommodation experience.
Rommel, I mean, good quality basic accommodation is what Optivo Students does,
Yes.
and it's still incredibly popular. So how have you managed to sort of restrain yourself from trying to compete with all of those facilities in London?
So when I moved over to student accommodation in 2017, I was actually quite concerned about how far we were back relative to then the rest of the market with the new student accommodation providers, having gyms, cinema rooms, and all those things that really I wanted for our team and our students. But somewhere along the line, I think we did some research. We spoke to a lot of residents. We looked at the feedback we were getting in terms of what's good, what's not, what we could improve. And it does come down to basic, kind of facilities where the students can sit, can talk to one another, but really thought out spaces. So, our investment, one-off kind of investment over the next 3 years, will focus on actually optimizing the spaces that students live in, and we will co-create those spaces with them. And from that, I think we can learn to start to build a community, because what we don't want to do is detract from what's important in terms of space. And study space is very important to them. So rather than have a cinema room or a small TV room, we can in fact have something like that, place to study and just kind of congregate. With furniture, they can really move around as well, because I think design is particularly important. So for us, that translates to a much more positive experience for students. There's something meaningful to develop relationships, and that's what our business is about, is building communities.
I guess that sort of brings us nicely onto the next question. Really, is you've clearly illustrated that there is a place for diversity in product. But is it realistic in the future for us to have this kind of diversity of product? This is clearly what international students are crying out for. It's certainly what domestic students are looking for, but we're in this kind of a bit of a hiatus at the moment, where we don't have very much at the basic level of good quality, well managed, secure accommodation, and then we've got the really high level, which there is clearly a market for as well. Not much in between. What do you all see for the future? Is it possible?
Well, if I jump in here, I'm not known normally for hyperbole, but I think what we're facing actually is quite I'll be interested to see what the other panelists think, but I think we're facing a really difficult few years, because we have a combination of things going on in the market which is going to make the development of any student accommodation incredibly difficult. So we have potential of HMO landlords potentially moving out of the market because of the Renters Reform Bill and other reforms. You have spiraling prices and supply chain moves out, so it's very, very difficult to build things. We've got universities. More universities are operating in deficits, so they're not going to necessarily want to put lots of capex on their books. So I think we're going to have a real difficult time of it. So if we can build something, it'd be really good. We're looking at the moment at that affordable offer again, interestingly, which is the shared facility. So we're moving away from en suites necessarily. A lot of people have been bringing studios back into their design because they cost the same to build, but they generate more revenue, and that just tells you where the cost economics of building for building those residences are at the moment. And that comes after, you know, last 10 years of supply not being able to keep up with demand. And now we've got this sort of ballooning sort of 350,000 extra students, potentially UK students, increases in international students. And it's going to be critical to universities' capacity to grow and to participation, which is the important thing. Depressing.
It's a conundrum, isn't it? You know, the lack of supply and the growing demand that Amit was talking about earlier. You know, there's the availability of accommodation, but the difficulty of getting things built. You know, Unipol monitors the number of bed spaces each year, and 2 years ago there were 30,000 new bed spaces. This year it's down to about 17,000. So you can start to see that crunch in people just being able to physically build stuff. I think there's you know, we've got the first generation of a lot of PBSA coming up for refurbishment soon, haven't we? If you think about the market, and there is an opportunity to not go for let's make it even more luxurious or try and increase the rent. There is an opportunity there to try and be really rigorous and focused on keeping rents low, and maybe taking out some of the facilities that don't get used, the cinema rooms, increasing bed spaces, but focusing on study spaces instead. You know, there is the opportunity to kind of, through refurbishment, to try and offer something that's more affordable, or at least hasn't grown as rents that haven't increased as much. But I think one of the things that we concluded from the accommodation cost survey, and we did it with a heavy heart really, was that, you know, now was the time to think about providing targeted financial support to individual students, rather than saying, oh, all the rents should be lower, which is just very difficult to achieve for people at the moment. We said there needs to be more targeted financial support for students who came from means-tested backgrounds, and for some kind of middling families where perhaps they've got 2 kids at university at the same time, and just the cost of that. So and that was one of the recommendations from the report. We know a couple of people are thinking about it. Unipol is going to be bringing in a bursary for next year for our own tenants, a limited one, but it's something that we can do, and we hope that the sector will look at that more seriously, particularly the private sector, and try and come up with some financial support to enable students to continue to go away to study where they want to.
I think that could be the solution to diversity in product. Deanie and I are involved in quite a lot of pricing and proposition discussions with our clients, and whilst you might have this product actually within a building, you could have a range of different prices to appeal to different people, rather than think it has to be, you know, a whole building or a whole block. It can be really targeted, as you say, Victoria. One area that we think is interesting to cover is how might technology in the future maybe reduce costs? You know, could technology take the place of some staffing costs, which is generally kind of the biggest operational overhead? And how does technology versus face-to-face contact kind of weigh up, really? It's a tough one.
Not my area. I'm going to say
same here, not my area.
But I'm going to have to say I do think that face-to-face contact is really important, particularly in these at points in the year. In these settings, you just have to have people on the ground seeing and interacting with people. So I'm sure there are elements of customer support, the booking process that could be better automated, even some well-being support perhaps, but I think well-trained, sensitive people in the building is a must for me.
I think that's right. we're using more app-based technology for those types of processes. Victoria, like we're doing the automated check-in. Actually, it was COVID brought stuff forward quite quickly. I think we had lots of student experience stuff which was then suddenly transferred onto the app-based platform. I guess we're using stuff like sensor technology, believe it or not. I mean, this is really nerdy. Like sensor technology for testing taps, you know, can you believe it? And it's back-ended to our plan-on system. So rather than going around testing every single tap, you can go around and test the ones that need to be tested. It reduces the number of people who are required, so hopefully you don't, you know, you can reduce your overhead, and you don't have to pass these costs, that type of costs, onto students. So hopefully that's, you know, one way we're working on it at least.
So actually, prompted by John's idea, I think yes, COVID has been a big influencer in terms of crunching the whole behavior change life cycle to migrate towards technology. I think one big use case I have seen on our portal is this virtual tours and 360-degree tours with these operators have. In fact, that if it becomes part of their lifestyle and the way we engage with students, I think that reduces a lot of cost, especially in the peak letting season. You don't need a lot of manpower on ground to take every student for the viewing in person. In fact, it also saves a lot of time, because earlier for international student, for housing, at least there used to be one trip with the parents used to make along with the student, right? That's not needed today. You get the virtual viewing, you get everything what you want online through technology. And if the brand is reputed, I think there is a huge comfort now with 2-3 years of COVID related enforced or forced behavior change. People are comfortable buying their accommodation online. So I think that has been a big savior as far as technology is concerned.
So I'd just like to add that, you know, for us, yeah, and COVID has been, I suppose, kind of a catalyst for our digitalization kind of journey over the last 18 months or 2 years. And where we have managed to create capacity, rather than kind of reduce the staff base, we've in fact invested the time in doing things that are more meaningful to the students. So that's around kind of the Res Life programs and welfare and well-being, and focusing their time on that, where we are able to create capacity. For example, we've transitioned to, you know, digital check-in, check-out, the automation of then kind of the application process, all the things that free up staff time. It gets them diverted back to actually providing that much more meaningful transaction with our customers. But as you know, there are other pressures, and I think compliance, like health and safety, become, you know, and where we do save time, perhaps then new legislation comes out, there's more requirement around fire safety inspections, that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, whilst we can be efficient, I imagine, you know, for us and our business is that, you know, we're highly regulated. We've got a number of, you know, obligations to meet, whether contractual, whether it's driven by, you know, legislation. And yeah, I guess reducing operating costs will always be a priority for us. But in terms of the kind of staff base, I think there's always a place for them, and it's around how we shape our service around the demands, suppose, the needs of our customers. So that's my take on it.
Matthew, how do you think the whole kind of quality of life weighs up when, you know, affordability and the anxiety around that versus, you know, face-to-face contact and customer service? You know, is it ever one or the other?
We do quite a lot of assessments of places that have been built to find out what people think and feel about where they live. There's obviously a drive to talk to people digitally, but we always have a face-to-face component, because you can never get the level of detail or nuance or I don't know, trust in a process that you get through talking to people face to face. And I think it's the same in most contexts, that people appreciate it. There has to be some human contact at some point, and these are also potentially quite not vulnerable, but, you know, they're people who are going out on their own for the first time. They might be in a new country. So I think any support and any kind of just any support that we can give is probably a good thing.
We talked about it a bit before. I think, Matthew, you were saying about facilities and how actually looking at your local area and that sort of that partnership approach, I guess, could bring in cost efficiencies as well. If any of you got any examples of how sort of partnership approach between developers, operators, landlords and communities have worked, from a cost point of view?
Well, I guess when I looked at the rent price questions, I was very interested in the sort of London figure, £259, and I went back to our accommodation and I said, how many of our rooms? We've got a few hundred rooms that are significantly below that figure. But the truth of how those rooms were developed is one that has its roots in partnership, because obviously London's an incredibly difficult market to build in, because obviously, or typically, those schemes that are residential, sales, usually win the day because they're generating typically more value than student accommodation. But in our relationship with a particular university in London, what we did was we said the university uses the residents over the summer, almost like a sort of hotel, letting centre for study language schools and other students. And they wanted to hang on to that revenue because it was a significant revenue. So they took the revenue for that effectively. Even though we could have obviously made a play for it, we were then letting it, say, 42 weeks, but that enabled us, the difference between those two things in the context of the model allowed us to pitch those rooms at £180 a week, which, is very low for London, and a low base from which to start, which means those rooms are, you could look at it if you were a sort of greedy investor, you could say they're under-rentalised, but that's not how we view it. We view them as an affordable option and a benefit of the partnership.
Yeah, I think partnerships, long-term partnerships with universities kind of faded away for a while, didn't they? Probably not for UPP, but for a lot of other for a lot of other providers. Universities were hesitant to enter into them, but I think the shortages that we've seen over the last year might be those starting to come back and become more seriously considered by a lot of universities, because at the moment, first-year students, new students to the city, are at the end of the queue when it comes to finding accommodation, because returning students are snapping up PBSA rooms in the market earlier in the cycle. So when it gets to August, there's not much left if you're a fresher or you're coming through clearing, or that you just haven't got sorted yet. So I think quite a lot of university towns dealing with shortages. Universities in those towns where there is a shortage might start to look at some of these longer term deals and remember what was good about them. And one of the things that's good about them is sharing risks to reduce rents. And we think there's a really good place for that. And, we'd be very pleased to see some of that come back. As a landlord ourselves, Unipol is about to enter into a long-term deal and with a university that we work with, and the sole aim of that was to pick, we had a rental point and we didn't want to go any higher than that, and the university agreed with our approach, and then they were able to go into a long-term deal with us so that we could offer that affordable rent, and that's only possible when you have that security and sharing of risk. So hopefully they will start to become more of a feature of the market.
85% of our youth forum told us they hadn't spoken to anyone about their financial concerns, despite 58% of them struggling to get by financially. Obviously this is quite a shocking statistic for us. What do you think the sector can do? What help could or should be out there if young people are struggling? And I guess there's two ways of it. One, they could be struggling, actually financially to pay their rent, or their parents are, but also the anxiety and stress around, generally, cost of living at the moment. Yeah, over to you. What could or should be done out there to help support students through this, and encourage them to put their hand up and say they are struggling at the moment.
Yeah, I saw some interesting research recently, which was about students being worried about the pressure that was being put on their parents funding them, and it was sort of impacting on their mental well-being, which I thought was a sort of an interesting sort of piece of data. I guess we've talked to universities in the past, and our view is that they have very close relationships with their relationship lender, typically more than one. So we've encouraged universities to actually use that relationship for those particular institutions to come and get more involved in educating students about finance. And we continue to do so. We did some work a number of years ago on potentially universities raising bonds as ways of potentially providing support to their students. So I think that's sort of work in progress. I don't know what the appetite would be now, given where we are financially with universities, but that's something that we're continuing to push.
Amit, how do international students navigate this generally if they're having problems? Are they more or less likely to ask for help?
So yeah, so 2-3 things have happened, Sarah, in the international space, and in particular to India as a market, and that's where the maximum growth has happened. If you see the international diaspora, maximum growth has come in last 2 years from Indian markets, right? Again, by nature, Indian students stroke parents, they are not, or rather the growth, the segment in which has happened, they don't come from a very wealthy background, and many of them have actually relied upon financial support from the lenders or institutions who lend for education. Unfortunately, they don't get to source secure lending from the destination market where they're going. So they need to do that in India. Thankfully for us, there has been a revolution within the lending space in India. It used to be a very conventional space where it used to be primarily a collateral-based lending and primarily only for tuition fee, which has changed in the last 4-5 years. There are a lot more lenders who have come in who actually provide for or finance the cost of living related expenses too. The security aspect of it has come down. Most of the lenders' growth or financing growth has happened for meritorious students who are going for good quality programs to good universities. All of this I'm talking because we also have a product which helps the same student in securing finance by UniCredit. So we see the behavior change there. And lot more institutions have been forthcoming in last 2 years to provide for financing in the UK, and that has supported their expenditure. So more than families, actually, it's the lenders who have pitched in and financed that aspiration.
Thank you. We're going to have to wrap up now. I think what we've really learned from this discussion is there's some really actual practical solutions to what can be done to help support young people in their future housing journey, which for many starts at student accommodation. So thank you all for your views. I'm going to hand back to Deanie now.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. I wrote down lots of stuff around getting more advanced information out to people, more diversity of product. There's lots of opportunities around refurbs. I think there's some really great ideas that we can all take away and see what we can do to answer this ongoing kind of issue that we have. The next theme that we'll be discussing is technology, which we had a little discussion on today. So we'll be back on the 10th of November. You can sign up to that webinar now. That was with our partner Apudos, so thank you to them. So please do come back, and we've got another brilliant panel as usual. So do come back on the 10th of November and join us for that session. Don't forget, if you follow us on all our social channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, you can keep up to date with kind of recordings of these sessions, and also all our mini reports are on there as and when we're released. So please do come along and join our communities. We will be releasing the full report that's been analysed by Dataloft at the end of the year. So that will include more information beyond those mini reports. So please do keep an eye out for that, because that will give you the full picture of all the research that we've done. Once again, we do want to thank UPP, because we couldn't have been sharing all this information to the sector without them. So a big thank you. And also thank you to all our other series sponsors, which is Loft, UCAS, Apudos and CoLive, because they've enabled us to bring all the other kind of mini reports to you all. So thank you. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. We hope to see you back on the 10th. And once again, a big thank you to all our panel for joining us and all our guests for viewing. So thank you and bye-bye.